You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks. This is episode 93. I'm your co-host, Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a man who, if he was a rancor, his nickname would be Mulkey. Hello, Mark. How you doing?
That was pretty good, wasn't it?
For you, Mark, it was perfect.
Thank you. Yes. How are you, buddy? How's things?
It's good. It's good. It's another week's flown by as it does. We're recording on Monday today, bank holiday, so can't believe it's bank holiday Monday. We're nearly into June. Where's 2021 gone? This is ridiculous.
Bonkers. Absolutely bonkers.
You've been busy this weekend. You've been trooping again, and how long has it been since you've put your? I mean, I don't want to get into your personal life. I was going to say how long it's been since you dressed up, but that's another question. How long has it been since you dressed up and gone out publicly wearing your outfit?
So last year we managed to squeak a small little troop down in Fordham Bridge for our good mate Dave Tree, and that was in September. But that was the only one we did last year, just because normally I tend to start my trooping calendar, as it were, around about March, so when MCM Birmingham kicks off. And this one was at the Museum of Steam and Power at Malden, which is a lovely little non-profit museum which have these whacking great big steam engines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they did a family fun day, so they've got like a lot of land around, and so they had bouncy castles and burger stalls and all this kind of...
All the good stuff.
Like, all the fun stuff. They invited us along because we've long been a supporter of both the museum, but also, you know, we do various events there across the year. So we went down there for kind of just, you know, photo ops and meet and greets out in the sun. And it was beautiful. It was lovely. It was fun. We had Chewbacca, we had Princess Leia, we had Rey, we had me, obviously, in my X-Wing pilot and a Jedi. So we had a nice time. Everybody was outside, you know, so social distancing and a massive field wasn't an issue. It allowed us to have our masks off and see people's faces and see kids smiling. So it was almost like a small slice of normality. And I think it was well needed by everybody who both trooped it, but also just, I think, the general public as well. So we had a great time. Yeah, brilliant. It was fantastic.
How tiring was it? Because I'm very concerned. I get knackered at celebration. I get tired walking around places anyway because I'm bloody lazy. So I'm thinking now, having spent the better part of 18 months sat on my derriere, getting up and about and moving and doing stuff, like, you know, fairly active stuff as we do at these conventions. I know it's going to, and I ain't getting any younger, so I know it's going to wear me out a bit. How's it for you?
To be honest, my feet were tired, but I think we all were a little bit nervous about putting those costumes on because it was very much a case of, are we going to fit in? And both me and Karen, my partner, did a bit of a trial trying on session the night before, and I was like, okay, must remember not to eat anything or breathe. But actually, to be fair, I was all right, so it was fine. In terms of like busyness, it's quite busy there, actually. I mean, it was a bank holiday. It was nice and sunny. And also, I think the fact that there's probably a good opportunity for local people to get out meant that it was fairly busy, but it wasn't like rammed. There was no real issues with social distancing or anything like that. You know, like I said, there's a lot of space. So we would just kind of do circuits of the field and just kind of walk around, and we'd stop for 5 minutes and people in the area will come take photos, do that like maybe twice or so, then go back in. And then, you know, have a little bit of break, you know, let Chewbacca kind of cool off and all that, and then kind of go back out and do that 2 or 3 times, and then you kind of call it. So it wasn't too tiring, but I mean, at the same time, I did notice it. You know, I guess you'd say I wasn't really match fit for it. So you're right. So it's, you know, it's old age, but I guess it happens to the best of us. But it was just such a nice experience just to see people and just get out and just get back to doing what we love doing and have a sense of normality, which is, I think, sorely needed at the moment.
Oh, totally. I'm mega excited to get out to an event. There's stuff coming up, like I say, London Film and Comic Con, and then once we get past that, it hopefully start getting busy throughout the summer. But we've got loads to talk about on this episode. Yep. Let's get straight into it. Let's start with some really good news. And this is event related. Rancho Obi-Wan, they've announced that not only are they bringing back the virtual gala this year, which will take place on the 23rd of October. And I don't know if anybody had chance, hopefully you did, to check out the gala, the virtual gala last year. Fantastic coverage, really great. But they've also announced the in-person, real-life, feet-on-the-ground version of the Rancho Obi-Wan Gala. It takes place in Petaluma at Rancho Obi-Wan, Saturday the 20th of August 2022. I can't tell you how excited I am for this. I've not been for a few years because the one year I couldn't go because I was doing believe it or not, a Star Trek event on a Muppet. So I missed Rancho. That was a mistake. And then they didn't run it the following year because they wanted a break. And then Corona came along and that didn't happen. And then we're not doing it this year, but we are doing it next year. So there's been a fair break, but great news. Rancho Gala's back Saturday, the 20th of August, 2022. Great news.
That is really fantastic. And I think literally as that news broke, or probably the day after, my annual renewal came up for my membership for Rancho. So that's been renewed for the year. And as you said, the virtual event that Steve and Matt hosted last year was amazing. Do you think 20th of August 2022, do you reckon maybe Steve had a word with Reed Pop and said, look, we're going to host Rancho Obi-Wan on, we're going to host a gala in August. So do you mind moving celebration a little bit earlier so it doesn't clash?
If anyone's got the stroke to do that, it's Steve. So that would not surprise me. It would please me. I would be very happy if that was the case. Yeah. I did notice that, yeah. It's just hopping into that sort of late August slot was a good move. And I know that the guys at Rancho previously, for a number of the previous events, they always held it the last week of October or the first week of November. And they'd wanted to bring it forward more into the summer because the nights are longer, so it's lighter and it's just the weather's nicer and it's just Northern California. So that, you want to take advantage of that beautiful weather and the longer days. But they never got a chance to do it. So now August should be just nice to have that little bit longer. The weather's going to be that much nicer. Brilliant news. Yes, to your point, yes, I would say Steve spoke to the stars and made it happen.
Hi, this is Amy Ratcliffe, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Andor carries on, continues filming, moving around the country. Our friend Sander DeLange, who does stuff on the site, told me that apparently so far there are 8 filming locations around the UK that Andor has shot at. The latest one is Black Park, which is not that far from Pinewood Studios. They were there last week, the week of May 25th that week, and now they're there this week. They've redressed the sets, moved things around, and they're going to be filming this week as well, apparently. Interesting news that they're utilising so many UK locations.
It's fantastic. I suppose maybe it's just down to what they want to do and possibly maybe the limitation that they can't get away with filming style in using the volume perhaps. So it's great. I mean, it's great for British filmmaking and I suppose a local area and all that. So that's great. But yeah, 8 locations, they're getting around a bit. So that will be quite a fun little pilgrimage once we know exactly where they filmed and what they've used it for and stuff. And we can kind of go and visit and line up for photos that we take with, what they used on set. So yeah, fantastic. And I think you said off to Scotland after this, isn't it? Or was that happening concurrently?
Concurrently, I believe, yeah. So they're up in the Highlands. A couple of our guys went up there, as people have been doing at Cleveleys, Promenade, and down at Winspit Quarry and places like that, just taking some snaps to give people a sense of the geography. But there's definitely more coming. But I think a lot of the local press had assumed it was Obi-Wan, but we understand all of it is Andor at the moment. Fantastic news to see all this stuff filming around the UK.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zebralios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the force be with you.
Very interesting news arrived this week via Palpameans on Twitter. Small piece of footage came out where basically, and I'm paraphrasing, and you can find the clip through the show links if you want to have a look at it, but basically Boyega said that he's open to returning to Star Wars as long as it's with Kathy Kennedy, and JJ, and some of the other crew members. So he's quite specific in naming those particular people, but also fairly open in terms of other crew members and such. But the point is, he makes it very clear, succinct but clear, that he is open to a return to Star Wars. Now, my question to you, Mark, above and beyond that being good news, do you think John has worded it correctly in the sense of, and this is a broader question, JJ's now moved to Warner Brothers, so generally you would imagine he's fairly tied up with the Warner Media stuff, and he's working on DC superhero stuff apparently, and there's a lot of other shows. He's got 6 iPads on the go and he's working on everything at once and directing a film, so it's not like he can't spin plates, but he's got a lot going on. Kathleen Kennedy, you would imagine, given where she is in her career, she's probably seeing out this contract and may or may not pick another one up. But, she moves on to pastures new, wanted to focus back on a producing career or do something totally different. It wouldn't be a mind-blowing thing. Do you think John is saying, I'm happy to come back to Star Wars, or I'm happy to come back to Star Wars, but only if it's with JJ and Kathleen?
Question for you. Where was this video done? Because I'm just looking at the background and there's like a Sith Trooper helmet and there's lightsabers and stuff. So I'm just wondering, where has this filmed, basically?
That's a great question.
Is it actually something that has come out recently, like somebody's just kind of caught him in, I don't know, Forbidden Planet or something in London? Or is this something that was maybe filmed back around the time of Rise of Skywalker? Because I think that would influence our perception of it, because obviously if it's round Rise of Skywalker and he's just come off of a film and he's kind of still in that kind of promotion area, he's obviously going to be saying, oh yeah, well, I'd love to do more, more with Kathy and more with JJ, because that's what everybody says, It'd be interesting. I suppose also it would greatly depend upon JJ's contract and how exclusive he is with Warner Brothers. If JJ is in some kind of exclusive contract for the next, 5 or 10 years, then I'll be surprised if Warner Brothers are going to let him out to go and film another Star Wars, especially if he's going to be the one who's meant to be picking up and lifting the DC universe, which is sorely needed, in my opinion. If this is like a year old or something like that, or 2 years old, it's like, how does this now relate to the stuff he said about Finn should have been developed a bit more and all that kind of stuff? I mean, he's kind of hinted before that he would be kind of happy, or open to the idea of coming back, but then you shove a couple of million in front of anybody and they're going to be happy to do most things. What's your gut feeling on this?
Well, you make a great point in that there's no indication of when that video was taken. So going back to your first point, if he's just coming off the back of the press tour and everything's cool, the film's made $1 billion and everyone's happy, and he's moving on to pastures new and says, I'll come back, I'll do something. At that point, the massive negative backlash to Rise of Skywalker probably hadn't, if it was during that time period, then that would kind of stack up, because you wouldn't be negative about it particularly. There was a few snippy little things at him and Oscar Isaac, like, I'll come back if I need a new house kind of attitude.
Yeah.
But generally, it was fairly positive, I would say. If this is recent, it would play into that comment again you just mentioned about when he said, I can record it lying on my sofa, I'll do animated Finn stuff all day long, I'm happy to do it. I think Finn is a character he cares about. That's my gut feeling, is that his annoyance with the situation, above and beyond the obvious real world aspects of all the other stuff that's gone around it, last summer and so on and so forth, in realms of Star Wars, which is what we're here to talk about, and the character, I think he cares enough about Finn as a character that he wants to see more. I mean, he comes into Star Wars, he comes into Force Awakens, obviously Rey is the focal character, Han, Luke and Leia are in the film in varying degrees, so they're going to take a lot of shine. Oscar Isaac was the surprise package of The Force Awakens, because when they started filming it, his character was going to die. And obviously he impressed JJ enough that he said, let's keep this character and this guy around. So Boyega's place was set. I always think of him as kind of like the Han Solo character. Han Solo was never the star of the original. Harrison Ford was, but Han Solo wasn't. So,
correct.
And you can understand at the back end of that, Ford wants to go off and do other stuff. So he does a second indie film, but then he's doing Witness, Mosquito Coast, all the other stuff he did in the 80s and moving on. And he can understand that because he wanted to test himself as an actor. Harrison Ford was nominated for 1 Oscar for Witness. Boyega's won a Golden Globe. So Boyega's career is now really well set as an actor. So it does, to your point, it's key to know when this was filmed. Was that right in the aftermath of Rise of Skywalker, when he said, of course I'll come back? Or was this, like you say, was this last week when somebody asked him to go, I'll come back if Kathy and JJ are around? Going back to your thing about JJ, I'd be amazed if he tied himself into an exclusive deal. I'd have to go back and look at, and Brian is the guy Brian Cameron would know about this.
Brian
He's really up on this. He would know, but I'd be amazed if JJ tied himself down, because I just think when he'd done Force Awakens, there was a whole overlap of, Into Darkness, Force Awakens. He's got a lot of fingers in that Trek pie. And then he's doing Star Wars. So there was a real sort of conflict of interest going on. And I think he's a big enough name and savvy enough to not loop himself up in agreements that means he can't do it. If he wanted to do it, he's like, I'm doing this. Yeah, I'm doing that. If he had a third stab at it, or I personally don't see JJ coming back. I think he's probably looking back at the sequel trilogy thinking, should have just directed the whole damn 3. That's my gut feeling.
Well, yeah. He said in that, was it Variety interview the other day about they should have planned it a little bit better.
Well, that's interesting. That's a whole other thing. I mean, that's a good point. Yeah, because he, reading bits of that, I only read the cliff notes. I only read the big chunks of it. But did he ever actually mention specifically that he was talking about Star Wars, or was he just talking in general? We just said about his DC work coming up, and you would assume that is pre-planned to a certain degree. Marvel's the master at this. They're the big boss, aren't they? You know, they've seeded things. They've maybe not written it in great depth, but they've seeded things way out. They kind of knew they were aiming towards Infinity War when they were doing Avengers. You got to think DC's got to be thinking like that. And JJ has always had this mystery box thing, and he always got criticised for not knowing how to finish his show off, like Lost and all the other bits and bobs. Do you think he was referring specifically to Star Wars? Because it kind of feels like he was, without ever saying it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably what he was. But then, like, for instance, the Lost thing is quite interesting, at least from what I remember reading interviews at the time, and I think even, like, behind-the-scenes documentary, they were quite honest, and they kind of came out and said, ABC approached him and said, we've got an empty time slot, in the full schedule between 8 and 9. Write us a series. So they wrote Lost. So there was no kind of like massive impetus to do it. They didn't have like this great idea that they needed to get made. They just made it. They wrote it. That's like, it's American TV. It's done by committee and, writers sat around the room. And, like you said, he was basically there to set the whole thing up. I'm sure like with Lost and with Force Awakens, he wasn't planning. He didn't expect to have to finish it off. And I think possibly if you were to go back in time and actually grab JJ and take him for like an In-N-Out burger or something like that whilst he's writing The Force Awakens, say, look, although Kathy and that are saying that you won't be finishing this trilogy off, you will end up having to wrap up episode 9. He might change his mind about certain decisions and certain plot points. And it's that whole thing of, and I don't want to use it, but I'm going to have to use it. If we have to start apportioning blame, I don't know if it's necessarily laid down at the feet of J.J. Abrams, because if he's basically being told, you have to set this thing off, you have to get it going, but where, it's like pushing a car down the road, which, it's got a flat battery. Once it's up and running, it's down to the driver, the producers, to kind of focus it to its end destination. So if you're just pushing it down the road and suddenly it picks up and it starts going off, you don't necessarily worry about where the car's going to end up. It could end up in a ditch, it could end up in a lake, or it could end up in Amazing City. I've always had this theory that maybe Lucasfilm had a cultural identity change and crisis going on with a transition going from independent company to Disney, whereby they wanted, or maybe Kathleen Kennedy wanted to try and preserve that whole independent filmmaker vibe.
Yeah.
By kind of saying,
you come in and do what you want to write.
We're going to bring these auteur directors in who are going to write, who's going to direct, and it's their vision, and then they're going to make the Star Wars that they want to make. And rather than trying to maybe fit into that very kind of like specifically kind of planned out Marvel Cinematic Universe, which of course, ironically, is what they were all kind of aspiring to be, which is what DC is, which is what Star Wars is, and Star Trek. Yeah. Everybody now is trying to make sure everything's connected so that they can basically mimic Marvel, on some degree.
You make a great point in that changeover between indie company to a division of a bigger company, because people do get a bit twitchy about that still being part of the conversation. But when you're talking about Force Awakens and Rogue One and the earlier films of the Disney period, if you want to call it that, that was just so much a part of the conversation because, like you say, even in 2012, when Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney and all of that's happening, in the summer of 2012, the first Avengers film came out. So you'd already had Iron Man, Hulk, Iron Man 2, Captain America and Thor come out, and then Avengers ties it together. And you think back to the summer of 2012, like 9 years ago now, good grief.
Crazy.
What a massive deal that was. Look at what they're doing. They're pulling all these threads together. These 6 films are all coming together into one big, and all the characters are going to meet, and we're going to get new characters. And it seems almost twee now when you compare that to what they did later on down the line with Infinity War, which was like next level. And now Marvel are carrying on, and they're doing it on Disney+. When you look at the conversation in 2012, you couldn't help but look at Marvel as a template to go, we want to do that. But then again, like I said earlier, you look at Marvel and how far ahead they plan, not in great depth. They've got the beautiful balance. They, like you just said, you want your filmmakers and writers to come in and go, I've got a story I want to tell in this space. I want it to fit in with everything else, but I don't want it to contradict it. I want it all to work. And there's the room for Marvel to go, you do your thing, Taika Waititi. Go and write Thor Ragnarok and make it as wacky and crazy as you want. But we need to get this in, and we need to see that. And in the end credits, we want to put this. And he's like, yeah, cool, fine, whatever, go for it. And however they do it, Marvel makes it work. Star Wars hasn't found that balance between or don't appear to have found the balance between giving the writer the latitude to tell whatever story they need to tell, but go, we're going to go bowling down the bowling alley, but there are going to be those little rubber things at the side that stops it going into the lanes. Well, Star Wars hasn't put the rubber things in, but Marvel has. So your story can be as interesting and as freewheeling and as unique. Ant-Man and Iron Man are completely different films, sort of thing. They've got their own vibe and their own feel. Any Marvel film has got its own style, but they're all completely Marvel. Just genius filmmaking on a grand scale that Star Wars maybe hasn't quite got to. Just briefly before we move on, do you want to see Boyega come back and tell more Finn stories?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming back to something you said probably about 20 minutes ago, you wonder if Finn was shortchanged, not in The Rise of Skywalker, but was shortchanged by the preservation of Poe Dameron.
That's a great point.
And it was basically Oscar Isaac, wasn't he, kind of like lobbying to JJ saying, look, you write me off in the first 12 minutes. And I think like most of my characters have been killed in the first like half of a film.
Yeah, they didn't cast Sean Bean, did they? I mean,
no, exactly. But to be fair, like Oscar Isaac was a great Poe Dameron, and I think that was the problem, is that really in some respects Poe to me felt more like the Han Solo character, and especially in obviously Rise of Skywalker with the whole kind of spice runnings of Kachumi.
Yeah, totally.
But that was probably written in retrospect to try and make him out to be more like the Han Solo character.
Yeah.
And you kind of then have this other character in Finn who has an amazing potential story. And we've talked about this with what we could have seen with a Stormtrooper revolt.
Yeah.
There wasn't really enough screen time. And it is a shame. I mean, maybe in some respects it would have been better if Finn had died at the end of Force Awakens as well. But then if Finn dies also in front of Kylo Ren in battle, in combat, then suddenly Kylo Ren as a baddie is elevated, because not only has he done one of the most evil things by killing his dad, he's actually slain one of our other heroes in combat. And so then suddenly he becomes a lot more formidable.
Yeah.
And that suddenly then kind of gives the next two films a bit more breadth and a bit more kind of scope, explore potentially Poe Dameron and explore Rey without necessarily having to feel like we've now also got to kind of serve Finn and try and kind of finish off Finn's story as well in some way.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying with that. I think, in Last Jedi, the crate run, and Finn's like, I'm going to take out this cannon, and he's doing that run, and then Rose comes and bumps him out the way and gives him the little speech about saving what you love, not killing what you hate thing, which I don't see how that helped them in the moment. I think if they were going to kill Finn, that would have been a great heroic statement. Yeah. That being said, I like Finn so much in The Force Awakens that when we got to Last Jedi and I felt like he was barely served, he had that mission to Canto Bight, which was kind of pointless, and then comes back. He's the slightly chubby sidekick in a Julia Roberts film. You know what I mean? He's not given the... And generally in those films, it's the sidekick character's more interesting anyway. But I think with Finn, when you get to Rise of Skywalker... And bearing in mind, these three films take place only over in my head canon, it's like 12 months. I wish they would give us some genuine chronology of where these things happen.
Yeah, agreed.
But Finn feels like he's eased into his position within the ranks of the Resistance, like Poe clearly does. And Finn's more confident with himself, and he's sensing things. So there's a whole storyline there. I just think Boyega would look at that film, because I think JJ directs those actors better than anyone. Slight, and there's no slight on Rian Johnson, but he never cast them. JJ did. So I think JJ knew what he was looking for, and he knows how to get the best out of them, because he was there through the casting process and the whole thing. Rian Johnson inherited it, but JJ made that trio happen. Yeah, I just think there's more stories to tell with Finn. I hope something comes of this.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So this past week saw the arrival of episode 5 of season 1 of The Bad Batch, Rampage. What were your first thoughts going into this one, Mark? Did this one light your fire?
I found it really enjoyable. It was a enjoyable, frantic episode with just some great characters in it. The Zygerian slavers were awesome, and Baby Rancor, that kind of looked like a Funko Pop. It was great. I thought it was a really good episode. It kind of was a fun episode, really, in some respects. Didn't really feel there was too much peril, really, in the grand scheme of things. But there was enough to drive the story along. The guys are kind of running from the threat of bounty hunters and Fennec Shand. And, obviously they've got to start to develop relationships and stuff in the new galaxy. So I think, really, this is probably the strongest start to any animated series that Star Wars has done.
Yeah, I feel that way. Clone Wars didn't exactly get off to a slow start. Rebels was, with Spark of Rebellion was kind of iconic and really a solid start. But this, I'm really blown away by how interesting the characters are and how invested I am in them. Just the world building of the era, because we were at the start of the Imperial era. One thing that stuck out to me in this episode, and we're only 5 episodes in, was we're still kind of figuring out Omega, and the characters are figuring out their sort of familial relationship, if you like. They're all brothers and sisters, so, they're just trying to find their place in that. It's the second time that Omega has, the one episode when they were in the prison block and she climbed through the air duct and managed to get them out of the prison block in the one episode. And now in this one, they're captured and it's Omega that lets Moochie out, lets the Rancor out. It feels very slowly, without the characters realising it, or probably even Omega, that she's finding a place in the team. Is that how it feels to you?
I think that's a good observation. And I think hopefully what will happen is they'll stop saying to go back and, wait in the ship.
Yeah. And
we'll start to kind of maybe say, actually, hang back here in case it all goes tits up.
Yeah, she didn't like being sent back to the ship, did she? When they were looking down on the scene on Ord Mantell, she did not like being sent back to the ship, did she?
She wants to feel like she's part of that team, part of that batch, and that she's an equal to them. It's not a gender thing at all. It's just purely an age thing, really. Yeah. I think also that starting to show that the Bad Batch themselves are starting to kind of get to grips with the fact that they have a child with them.
Yeah.
After last week's episode, where they're dangling off the side of a speeder and a building and everything else, this episode saw her kind of traversing across like some wires and stuff, like SAS style.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder is how much training she's possibly had.
That's a good point, yeah, because she seemed familiar. I mean, she'd only ever known Kamino, and it is a training facility, a clone facility, but also a training facility. And she's inquisitive. You sort of saw that, the Kaminoan lady was sort of very stay with me.
Yeah.
It's almost like she was constantly saying, don't go running off, stay with me. You get the sense that she's inquisitive, and clearly she's sharp as a tack as a character. And one thing I really liked, many things I liked about this, I really did enjoy this episode, was Echo having the contact, because obviously he's connected in ways that maybe the other batchers aren't. He's got this contact. He knows it's called Sid. That's literally all he knows. And it's Omega that kind of figures out, you're Sid.
Sid.
They can't figure it out, but you're Sid. And, at least there's one smart person in the room. What do you think about Sid? Because, there is that contact, and it's something you see in Star Wars a lot. You see it in the comics a lot. You see it now in Bad Batch. These characters have contacts around the galaxy. And good grief, they've travelled a long way because Ord Mantell is way north, so they've really travelled to get to this place. What did you think of Sid?
It's fact that information broker, underworld kind of character. But like you said, you see a lot in the comics. And they're good ways of kind of propelling the plot along. We saw Sid dealing with Bad Batch and then with Biff Tuna and all that later on. It's a good way, potentially, that we could almost see there's a story thread there that actually she chucks them a few more bounties or like a few more rescue missions. So she gets in touch with them and that can help move the story along at certain points rather than them having to constantly go back to Ord Mantell. We know it's just a simple con message could kind of like come in and say, oh, we've got a mission for you. Or maybe let's flip that around and maybe actually the Bad Batch are like, actually, we're a bit short on cash. Let's contact Sid. Let's see if she can chuck us like a mission so we can get a few thousand credits and repair the ship or something. So there's, they need these kind of characters to exist because they're going to start to find that they're going to basically be folding really into the underworld. I don't ever see them kind of settling down like Cutler Quain did, or see them pretty much on the run for, the rest of their lives, I think.
One of the things that I think we assumed, and initially incorrectly, but increasingly it's becoming to be that way maybe, is that we thought, this is the A-Team. This is the mercenaries on the run. This is the A-Team. And the first 3 episodes, it wasn't that at all.
Yeah.
But last week was very clear about, you've got to pay for food, you've got to pay for fuel, you've got to pay for this lifestyle. If you want to keep travelling around in that ship and keeping those bellies fed, you've got to pay for it. And Sid this week is the one that says, well, I can throw work your way. They get given this mission to rescue Moochie, which of course they assume is the Faline kid. It's cool to see a Faline as well. But it wasn't. It was baby Rancor, Just slightly off topic there. Do you think that's the Rancor from Jedi, or do you just think that's another Rancor?
I guess it kind of comes down to the fact that it's quite believable in that you could think that actually one of the things that maybe Jabba does is deal in Rancors, either for, like you said, for himself, for the dungeon, or he's a kind of person that, can acquire those kind of beasts, because I'd imagine they're probably not easy to to capture.
True.
I said to Karen whilst we were watching it, I bet that's Bib, and I bet the Rancor's going to Jabba.
Yeah.
And that's the whole interconnected galaxy that we're trying to strive for with Star Wars. But at the same time, I just wonder if that would make it too small a galaxy. But actually, oh yeah, the next time you see this Rancor, Luke's going to drop a door on its neck. Either way, it doesn't really bother me. I mean, I kind of think if you're going to have a Rancor in the dungeon like that, it's probably easier to get it as a baby and let it grow into adulthood rather than trying to capture like an adult. I don't imagine you could probably capture an adult one and then kind of get it anywhere easily. Depending, I suppose, on how quickly Rancors age and how they grow and stuff could come into that. Has there been any kind of official confirmation, or is this just one of those things that will just be left unsaid?
I think people are assuming. I mean, we did the group review on Fantha, and some of the team think that it was just a Rancor. A couple, Paul Manayla thinks it's the Rancor. I think you can happily argue either way. I mean, the Rancor in Jedi had the tattoo, like a brand, but this thing's Wrecker punches it out. I know Wrecker's strong, but you know what I mean? So this thing's bashing that flying creature up and down like Bam Bam from the Flintstones. So clearly it's strong. And maybe it's just not been because it's not at Tatooine yet. So maybe it's not had that brand on it yet. So I think you could argue maybe it is. I mean,
either way, yeah,
you know, you look at nature and some creatures as pups are the cutest thing in the world, and they really do look like Funko Pops, like Baby Yoda, clearly modelled on a Pokemon character. You know, he's just got that look about it. And yet, when they grow up, it's like, that ain't the cute little kitten I knew 2 years ago or whatever. Yeah. And they do grow pretty quick. I'd love to go back and look at the cross-sections for Jabba's Palace that DK put out years ago. In my head, I'm thinking there's the main chamber where the Rancor is, but there's like antechambers around it, obviously where the door drops, you know, that's that little area there. Because Malakili's got to feed it, and he's got to, you know, it's got to go to the toilet somewhere. You know, there's all these little practical things that the thing's got to. I wouldn't want to be shoveling that.
Absolutely.
You know? So you know, there's probably antechamber. So Patissa was the name of the Rancor in Jedi, but you know, it's like horses have a thoroughbred name and then a racing name. You know, his racing name is Lou Lagoon, but his real name is Lord Fortescue the 15th or whatever. You know, so the Rancor could be his nickname could be Moochie, but his real name could be Patissa. They can easily work their way around it if they want to.
One thing that we've not really talked about, and I think this episode was even more obvious. It's Wrecker and his headaches and him trying to knock that chip out or something.
Ever since that got mentioned, ever since Omega mentioned that it's a physical thing in his head, the first time they had that rough landing and he saw him bang his head, and it was just like an accidental, like he'd stunned himself. Oh, wow, you know, and you just thought nothing of it. He's got inside his own head knowing there's something in there, but he hasn't verbalised it yet. You know, he's not the most conversational guy in that sense and probably can't verbalise well what he means. I think it's bothering him, but now, I mean, this episode, again, like you say, when he's holding his head and he's like, I'm fine, it doesn't want any fuss. I mean, obviously, Crosshair, we've not seen Crosshair since Cut and Run, so he could come back into it. You'd hope he'll come back into it at some point. He was more susceptible to following, you know, the good soldiers follow orders thing.
Exactly.
And you think Wrecker just likes the chaos, doesn't he? So getting stuck in with the Rancor was probably right up his street. And all the other Crash and Bash episodes they have. And just going back to Omega freeing them twice now. The first time, Crosshair was with them. They were proper captured in like a proper Imperial prison cell. This time, you think it, because you saw Wrecker break the chains and snap the handcuffs, and he could have got out when he wanted to, really. He just needed a diversion to do it. Normally, they'd have Crosshair with them. They haven't got Crosshair, so their balance is slightly off. You know, you saw them work as a unit on Camino in the training facility when Tarkin was watching, and you could see that all the banter stopped as soon as they stepped foot over that line, and it's like, right, we do this. And they all knew what they were doing. They've lost one of their limbs now because Crosshair's not there to play his part in that. And they've got to figure out, well, what's Omega's part? And if Omega's part's different to Crosshair's, which it probably will be, we've got to adjust our teamwork, if you like.
Yeah, the tactics,
Yeah, to accommodate what she does so the rest of us can cover the things that Crosshair... You know what I mean? There's lots of little thought processes, which is why I think this show's so good, because they're not rushing it. You've got lots of little angles and personality things that are playing in, and the galaxy is literally changing beneath their feet. That's the thing that I've enjoyed the most about Bad Batch.
Hello, I'm Warwick Davis, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Last week's episode, Andy Fernside sent us a question, and we threw it straight back at him. We said, what would you like to see if you had control over what's coming from Disney Plus? So, Mark, here is his reply. Hi, Marks, that's you and me, plurally. Thanks for discussing my question on the last show. Loved your suggestions, so maybe time to pitch them to Filoni. Not a bad idea. For me, I'm a big fan of the Jedi and would love to see them in action. I know we have the Whole Republic, which I'm heavily invested in, but it's not an era I had in my mind originally. I'd like to see a series during the final decades of the Republic, maybe around the time from when Dooku was a Jedi onwards. I'd like to see them interact with the Republic politics, which was a suggestion you made, then the missions they embark on. It doesn't even have to centre around the same Jedi. The other era I'd like to see is the Old Republic. I think that was your idea. I'd love to see the Jedi Battle of the Sith. The books and games show massive potential for a big multimedia project with TV, film, games, books and comics crossovers. The more I think about it, it does sound like the High Republic without the Sith, in brackets so far, but you know as well as I do that everyone wanted Knights of the Old Republic brought back into canon. And then here we go. Another thought and question for you. What are the Sith doing at the time of the High Republic? Are the conflicts we're seeing down to the Sith of the time, or are they waiting in the wings? P.S. Loving Good Morning Tatooine live on Sunday nights is a great way to interact with you guys and keep up with the latest news, and the production is spot on. Well done, Brian. So yes, heartily agree with that. Brian's done a great job.
Yeah.
Good Morning Tatooine's back very, very soon. So going back to Andy's question, what are the Sith doing at the time of the High Republic, and are the conflicts we're seeing down to the Sith of the time, or are they waiting in the wings? What do you think?
Ooh, good question. And that is one that really, I guess, those lovely people who were sat around that table with a massive whiteboard with all those different ideas and stuff at Lucasfilm a couple of years back when they started Project Luminous probably have the answer to, but yet they haven't told us. My thinking is that if there's going to be any kind of Sith shenanigans in the High Republic, I think it's possibly more likely to be connected to the Nihil rather than the Drengir, because the Drengir seem to be kind of like their own thing, and I haven't really gotten massively on board with the Drengir. The Nihil I quite like, because I quite like the chaos, but the Drengir, I don't know, they haven't quite landed with me yet, as it were. But we are still kind of very early on into this whole publishing program, and so what happens after the summer and into the next kind of phase of the High Republic, who knows? But it's a good point. I mean, because the thing is with the Sith is that we were always led to believe that they were there just biding their time, working in the shadows. I kind of feel like if they do anything too overt, then it kind of starts to unravel everything that was said in the prequels. What 200 years before, like, the events of Phantom Menace. So it's too early for Darth Plagueis or even Darth Tenebrous, I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, they must be doing stuff, and you kind of think that there is surely a story out there for the Sith in this High Republic. Maybe that's something that kind of comes in later on. Maybe it's not necessarily related to the Nihil or the Drengir. Maybe there is something else that we see. Again, a master and apprentice just working in the shadows somewhere to try and undo what, you know, Starlight Beacon is meant to be doing. So they've got to be there doing something, but whether or not we see it or not is another matter entirely.
I mean, I've just finished, finally, wow, only 5 months late, I've just finished Light of the Jedi, thank you.
Bravo.
Took me long enough. So I've been up to date with the comics, but I'm way behind with the literature stuff, so I'm going to get stuck into the other thing. I want to be caught up with as much of the literature as I can before Rising Storm comes out. That's the plan, but we'll see how I do. I would imagine you make a great point about Project Luminous, and this has been on the go for a long time as they've been prepping and planning, and we're only in phase 1, and I think there's 3 phases of High Republic. So I'd like to think that on that whiteboard you just alluded to, when they were breaking down the ideas for what they're going to do, someone on the board would have gone, no Sith. Phantom Menace makes it very clear when Qui-Gon and Maul clash sabers on Tatooine. That's the first time there's been any physical interaction with the Sith for 1,000 years. No Sith. That doesn't mean that the Sith aren't orchestrating things in the background, because they've laid low for so long. I mean, why would they not interact for a millennia, essentially, if they're just doing nothing? They've got to be doing something. So I think it's quite feasible that you step it back so many levels, the Sith are making things happen. They're starting this. I think the High Republic as a project, in the simplest terms, the beginning of the foundations of the Republic and the foundations of the Jedi Order are starting to crumble. And the Sith come in at a certain point down the line. Clearly, the prequel trilogy is when it really blossoms. So I don't see why they wouldn't have started to, like you say, it makes more sense for the Nihil, for them to have an involvement in their place in it, or maybe the Drengir, dark Sith magic sort of stuff. Maybe it is the Drengir. Whoever, there's certainly, I would imagine there will be other adversaries come in later on down the line, above and beyond the Nihil and the Drengir. So I don't think it's unreasonable to anticipate or expect the Sith to be behind, the Sith of the time to be behind that. If you actually saw a red-bladed lightsaber of a Sith Lord come attacking a Jedi Master in the High Republic, no.
Yeah,
no.
WTF.
That makes... You're now contradicting the prequel trilogy. I think if you had Jedi and Sith physically interact in the High Republic, I'd be really disappointed, because that completely undermines the moment of Qui-Gon and Maul having their big clash, because that really did feel like a big part of the mythology of Phantom Menace was like, oh my God, the Sith are back. It's like Voldemort turning up at the end of Order of the Phoenix. He's back.
Yeah.
It's that sort of, what? But for them to be the puppet masters, I think that's quite logical.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in some respects, maybe one impetus behind the High Republic was actually telling stories which involve a Jedi, which don't involve the Sith. When you kind of think about everything in the Skywalker saga, it's kind of wrapped up and evolves around the Sith-Jedi conflict. We see the evolution and we see the resolution in Rise of Skywalker, but then we have to actually show the Jedi at the height doing Jedi stuff, but not necessarily having to battle and be eroded by the Sith. I'd definitely like to see a canonization of the Rule of Two, which we kind of got with Darth Bane in the Legends era, but actually it would be quite interesting to see that and kind of see where exactly that's placed, how far back that goes, and maybe what led to it. I think that would be interesting. Obviously, the problem is with that now is that it's very hard to kind of write something like that directly in this new canon without people obviously comparing it to what went before. And I find it difficult sometimes to kind of like reconcile the different kind of timelines. And it's nice to remember it, but it doesn't necessarily count now. So therefore, put it to the back of your mind, let's focus on this timeline and what was going on there. It would be good to see something, but like you said, there shouldn't be any direct Jedi-Sith conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit like, it's a silly analogy, but it's a bit like Batman, isn't it? Batman doesn't only fight the Joker.
No.
And Star Wars has been largely Jedi are Batman and the Sith are the Joker. And there's the Riddler and there's Penguin, there's Catwoman, there's all the other stuff. So I'd like to think that the High Republic is showing Batman, inverted commas, fighting somebody else, on the galactic scale. Because, with the great emergencies and the disaster and all that sort of stuff, it is on a galactic scale. So, they travel around the galaxy just as quickly and as easily as they do in any other era. With the High Republic thing, and in terms of the Sith, going back to Andy's question, we might see them, but I don't think we're going to see them clashing. Yoda probably never crossed swords with the Sith until he fought Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones.
That's a very, very good point.
And he's nearly 900 years old at that point, because the Sith haven't been around for a millennia, so which only adds even more weight to the loss of Qui-Gon in Phantom Menace, doesn't it? Great question, Andy. I think we've kind of answered it, but keep those questions coming. Andy, you're more than welcome to send more questions in. Everybody else, millions and millions of other people listening to this, send your questions in. We will talk about it and more.
But if they do want to send questions in, Mark, how can they go about doing it?
Well, there's a thing called snail mail, which is a bit of a pain, so I wouldn't recommend that. But there are other options for sending in your questions. So if you want to be part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. That was a very good one. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. So get those questions in, thoughts, ideas, whatever. We'll talk about all of it. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds @Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. As we said earlier, this week there wasn't an episode of Good Morning Tatooine on Sunday. There will be one next week, so tune into that live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK time, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And then we'll meet back here next week for episode 94, I think.
Let's do it. I think that's a good idea. Have a good week. Everybody else, stay safe, wear a mask, get a vaccine, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.
Hey!